Today I'm adding faux gold gilding to 3D embossing. Hello there, Michelle Short here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. I'm here on the Altenew YouTube channel on the first and third Saturday of the month. So if you enjoy my videos, I'd love for you to subscribe. So let's get started. I have die cut 2 of the larger tag from the Terrific Tags die set from Classic Crest £110 solar white cardstock. I'm placing one inside of the Leafy Splendour 3D embossing folder. I wanted the bulk of the leaves to be on the right hand side and a few towards the bottom. Now this does mean that my tag is overhanging the side of the embossing folder. Now depending on the pressure of your die cutting machine, this can leave a mark. So ordinarily with the Platinum 6 die cutting machine, I would add in that shim, but I'm not going to do that in the hope that a little bit less pressure may mean that I don't get a mark. So I'm just going to run that through my die cutting machine. I got a lovely embossed image, really beautiful with those leaves, but I did get a slight line just at the top where the edge of that embossing folder is. So I'm going to take my bone folder and I'm just going to press that against that line there, and it is just going to help to press it down a little bit and make it a little bit less noticeable. I mean, to be fair, I'm not sure many people would actually notice it. It was very faint, but because I can see it, because I know it's there, I obviously want to try and remove it as best as possible. Once I add my bow over the top, you're not going to see it anyway. I'm pressing it down onto my sticky mat. That's going to hold it in place while I do my ink blending on top. I'm using the Leafy Splendour simple colouring stencils to add my ink blending onto the leaves. So I'm taking the first stencil here, kind of hovering it in place over the image, and it does tend to pop in quite easily like a puzzle piece. Just because you've got that embossed area there, it just kind of nestles around it, and then once I'm happy with the placement, I can stick that down to the sticky mat and that's going to hold it in place. I did just add a little bit of post-it tape towards the top there, just because I've got a little bit of exposed area of the tag and I don't want to accidentally get ink blending on it. I've then taken a random selection of inks from my collection. I picked 4 that I thought would blend quite nicely together, but not necessarily from the same colour family. I'm going for an autumnal look today. So I'm taking the lightest shade, which is Buttercream, and I'm using the micro blending brushes today. This is one of the larger brushes in the set, and I'm adding this yellow colour mainly towards the tips of the leaves, but on some of them I'm adding it more kind of like towards the side. I'm just kind of adding it in sort of random areas really. Although I don't necessarily need these leaves to look realistic, I do think it looks quite kind of a little bit more realistic, I suppose, by having colours in different places on leaves rather than them all being in exactly the same place. So I'm now going in with Caramel Toffee. This is an orange shade, and this does happen to be in the same colour family as the Buttercream, but because orange and yellow will automatically blend really nicely together, I could have just used a different shade of orange and it wouldn't have mattered, but I just happen to like these 2 shades anyway. So I'm adding this orange mainly sort of next to where I added the yellow. I do lose a little bit of the yellow, but in the end I still liked how it turned out. But I know that the orange and the yellow are going to blend really nicely together, like I say, so I'm kind of focusing it mainly towards that side. I can then go in with Ruby Red Fresh Dye ink, and I'm using the smaller of the 2 brushes from the micro blending brush set because I haven't got a huge amount of area left to cover. So I'm going in and just adding that colour in where the area is that I didn't add the yellow or the orange ink. And because yellow, orange and red blend really nicely together, I can just go over the area, and to be honest, I don't really need to do a huge amount of blending because it's automatically going to blend really nicely together. Obviously, by adding the red over the yellow, it is just going to make an orange anyway. So like I say, these leaves did end up a little bit more orangey rather than yellow, but I still really liked the end result. So just going in here, adding some of that red, it just kind of warms up the leaves a little bit. Like I say, I'm going for an autumnal look today. I then wanted to add a little bit more depth to the leaves, so I'm going in with Midnight Violet Crisp dye ink. And I'm adding this purple into some areas of the leaves. I don't want to add a huge amount because I don't want to have the leaves end up looking purple, but I do just want to add that extra colour in. And I'm focusing this area mainly where the red tones are, because if you mix purple and orange together, it does tend to make a brown. Now in this instance, it wouldn't really matter too much if I added brown to these, because autumnal leaves probably would have a little bit of brown on them, but I did really want you to be able to see that purple shade. And I do think adding the purple really does make quite a big difference to the overall look. Once I'd finished the ink blending, I then wanted to add the faux gold gilding on top. So I'm taking the metallic watercolour 14 pan set, and I'm taking the colour which is Gold Pearl. I've taken it out of the palette just for ease of use, and then I can add some water into the pan. Now ideally with these watercolours you would want to add the water in and then let it sit for a while before you mixed everything together. Now I'm being a little bit impatient at this point, so I'm using it as is, but a little bit later it does get better. But for the time being I'm placing some onto my sticky mat. I'm then going to take a foam applicator tool. This is like a kind of like a bit like a sponge. I'm picking up that paint and I'm going to dab it onto the leaves. Now the benefit of using the foam or the sponge applicator is that you kind of get a bit of a mottled look, which I think kind of adds to the gilding look. So you can still see kind of through it, and it's not completely opaque. You're not going to kind of cover the leaves completely. So I've added a little bit more water into the watercolour pan and you can see that I've got a much better consistency now. So I can go back in with the applicator tool, and because it was quite wet at this point, I got way more than I expected to, and I ended up covering a lot of this bottom leaf here, which wasn't the look I was necessarily going for. So I'm going to grab a little bit of paper towel and see if I can dab some off. Now because this is watercolour, and I didn't, although it looks like I've added a lot of water to it, I haven't really added a huge amount to it. It's going to soak into that cardstock and it's going to stay there and it's going to dry really quickly. So that is a benefit of doing this, but if you want to kind of remove any, it didn't really work that way. So positives and negatives to that. But in the end, I actually really love how that leaf looked. I thought it was really pretty. So sometimes accidents can be a good thing as well. So I'm just going around all of these leaves, dabbing some of that gold on. I'm focusing most of the colour towards the areas that are the darkest, so where the purples and the reds are, because it's going to show up a little bit more rather than the areas where the oranges and the yellows are. So I'm just going to remove that little bit of watercolour that was there at the top, just because I don't want to accidentally get my hand in it or something like that. I am quite clumsy. And then I can remove this first layer of the stencil, and I'm just going to hold it up in the light here so you can see that gold. I think it looks really pretty. I can then do the exact same thing with the second stencil. So I'm going to place it over the top, press it down, and then I can go in with the inks again and add the ink blending on top. And because that watercolour dried really quickly, I don't need to worry too much about smearing it or anything like that when I add the second stencil on top. And that is the benefit of using those watercolours versus maybe using an ink pad. So you could definitely do this technique with gold pigment ink, but you would want to heat set it in between, because if you added the second stencil on top and it wasn't completely dry, it would maybe smear it a little bit, which you might be going for that look, but I probably wouldn't want to. So I'm going in here again with that red ink to add a little bit of warmth onto these leaves. I have done this technique in the past with embossing powder and it worked really well. It is a little bit of a longer technique because you add in some embossing ink and then add the embossing powder on top, but it does look really cool with the kind of texture that you get from the embossing powder. So if you haven't seen that video, I will link it down below in the description bar here on YouTube, in case you want to see it, because it's just a different way of doing this technique. This technique that I'm doing today with the watercolors is a little bit quicker, I suppose, because like I say, you're kind of just dabbing it on, it's drying really quickly, and I really love the look of doing it with the watercolor. I do still love the look of doing it with the embossing powder as well, but there is something slightly different doing it with the watercolors. I did try this technique with the copper colour in the palette, and although it looked really pretty, you couldn't see it that much compared to like the gold. I think the gold stands out a little bit more, but I'm definitely going to try it with a few other colours of the watercolours in this set. I think lots of different colour combinations would be really pretty, maybe like a silver with some cool tones. So if you've tried this technique before, let me know in the comments what medium you used. I'm definitely interested in trying out a few different ways to do it. It especially works really nicely with the 3D embossing. But you could do this with a flat image as well if you wanted to. Obviously having the stencil there is really good for the dabbing technique because you mask off all the other areas. So now I've finished the other leaves, I can remove that stencil. And I think that gilding just looks so pretty on those leaves. I'm then taking the other tag that I cut and I can add some glue tape onto the back of that. And then I'm going to sandwich the two tags together. Because I've got that debossing on the back, I don't really want to see that. It'd be really nice to add a personal message onto the back of this, although I may add it onto a card as well because I think that would look really pretty. I wasn't 100% certain if the watercolour was dry. It definitely was. It dried at like really very quickly, but I did just use a paper towel there just to press the two tags together, just in case I got my fingerprints in it or something like that. I have cut the eyelet piece from the Labels and Tags 2 die set, and I've cut that from white cardstock, and I'm just adding that around the hole there at the top of the tag. Now in hindsight, I actually wish that I hadn't added this on. I think it would have looked just as nice without it. I do think it is a really nice finishing touch to some of my tags, but in this instance I actually think I would have preferred it without, but never mind. So just adding another one there onto the back of the tag just to finish that off nicely. And I'm just using my tweezers here just to try and line them both up. I'm then taking the antique gold metallic thread. I've cut quite a long piece of that. I folded it in half and now I'm folding it in half again. I'm then going to thread that through the whole of the tag and secure that in place at the front. It is a little bit on the slippery side because I have got 4 strands of thread here. I'm securing that in place and then I can separate those thread pieces, so 2 on each side, and then I can tie that in a bow. And I think having the double bow of this thread does make quite a big impact. I think it looks really pretty, kind of just having that excess there. It does make it, I don't want to say messy. I suppose you could argue it is a little bit on the messy side, but because it's on the messy side, I think it adds more impact. This side of the bow did get a little bit twisted, so I'm just going to use my tweezers here just to try and help move those threads a little bit. And then once I'm happy with the size of the bow, I can bring in my scissors and cut those tails down. In my last video, I created some sentiments using the One Go Solid Sentiment Strip press plate and die set. And I had lots left over, so I'm using the Thinking of You sentiment. I decided to cut it in 2 so that it was 2 separate strips. I found that if I placed it onto the tag, it kind of covered almost the whole width of the tag, and I felt that it kind of just cut it in half a little bit, if that makes sense. So I decided to cut the strip in half instead and have it so that it was kind of wonky and so you could still kind of have some flow through the tag with the leaves, and you could still see a lot of the leaves as well. So I've added some instant dimension foam tape onto the back of these strips. I can bring in my tweezers and then I can place them down onto the tag. And although I'm creating a tag today, this would work really well on a card or any other project as well. I just got a little bit of something there on the tag, so I'm just removing that with my tweezers, and then I can place the other sentiment down. And I do tend to hover these things. That's the benefit of using the tweezers. Once I'm happy, I can press that down. And then to add a little bit extra embellishment and kind of bring out the gold gilding a little bit more, I'm taking the antique gold sequins. I'm cutting 2 of them in half because I want to pop them behind the sentiment strip. Because I've got that foam tape there, I'm not going to be able to push a whole sequin behind. So if I cut it in half, it's going to look like it's all behind when it actually isn't really. So just popping that down, I can add the glue onto the back of the sequins. I just find it easier this way to add the glue onto the actual sequin itself, and then I can pop those behind. And then I can just add a small dab of glue towards the top here, and then just add one of those tiny little sequins on top. And I'm using the perfect picker for this because it works really nicely just to pick up those sequins. And then you've got the pokey end at the other side just to make that in place. And that is the tag finished for today. Let me know in the comments if you've tried this gilding technique. I think it works really nicely with these watercolors. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Hey there, Lydia here. I really do hope that you've just enjoyed the video. If so, please subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, turn on the notification bell so you can get your daily dose of crafty techniques and tutorials just like this. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.